My dad found out how much I earn, so he showed up with my spoiled sister and demanded that I give him my house. I didn't say a word, but when he came back the next day, he found out what no really means. I'm Alex Reynolds, 34, a software engineer who clawed my way up from nothing. For 10 years, I lived in a cramped studio apartment surviving on ramen while I worked 60-hour weeks building my career. No vacations, no luxuries, just pure focus and sacrifice. Last year, it finally paid off when I landed a senior position at Cypress Technologies, one of the most prestigious firms in Boston, with a salary that still feels surreal when I see the deposits hit my account. 6 months ago, I bought my first home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Nothing extravagant, but mine. Every square inch earned through my own sweat and determination. The house represents everything I've worked for: stability, security, independence, things I never had growing up. My childhood was a study in scarcity. My father, Richard Reynolds, was, and remains, a man who believes the world owes him something. He drifted between jobs, always quitting when a boss disrespected him or when work became too demanding. My mother left when I was 8, unable to handle his volatile temper and perpetual victimhood. My younger sister, Melissa, 12 years my junior, became his golden child, the one who could do no wrong, who deserved everything without earning anything. I left home at 18 after a particularly nasty argument when my father demanded I defer college to work full-time and support the family. "Family takes care of family," he said, while simultaneously refusing to look for steady employment. I refused, took out student loans, worked multiple jobs, and put myself through school. The decision created a rift that never truly healed. For years, contact was minimal. Birthday calls, occasional holiday visits that always ended in tension. My father would inevitably make comments about my fancy education, while Melissa would roll her eyes at my boring life choices. When I struggled, they never called. When they needed money, which was often, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. I gave when I could, sent Melissa money for college books, which I later discovered went to spring break trips, helped with my father's car repairs, always against my better judgment. Each time, the assistance was accepted without gratitude, as if it were simply my obligation. The last time I helped 3 years ago, my father needed $3,000 for emergency dental work. I later saw Facebook photos of him on a gambling trip to Atlantic City that same weekend. After that, I established boundaries. I would maintain contact, but the financial support stopped. They didn't take it well. My father called me selfish. Melissa said I was trying to punish them for being poor. I held firm, focusing on building my own life, while they continued their cycle of poor decisions and entitlement. Then came last Tuesday. I was working from home when the doorbell rang repeatedly, followed by aggressive knocking. Through the security camera, I saw them. My father, now 62 with more gray but the same scowl, and Melissa, 22, tapping away on her phone with a bored expression. I hesitated before opening the door. They hadn't visited in years, had never seen my new home, and certainly hadn't called to say they were coming. Something was off. "Well, aren't you going to invite us in?" my father demanded, pushing past me without waiting for a response. Melissa followed, her eyes immediately scanning my living room, cataloging my possessions. "Nice place," my father said, not as a compliment but as an assessment. "Really nice. Must have cost a fortune." "What are you doing here?" I asked, closing the door. "How did you even find my address? Is that any way to greet your family?" my father replied, settling himself on my couch like he owned it. "Melissa found you online. Smart girl." Melissa smiled smugly, dropping her designer handbag, likely a knockoff, onto my coffee table. "Your company website has your bio. Wasn't hard." I remained standing, arms crossed. "Again, what are you doing here?" My father leaned forward, hands clasped. "We saw the announcement about your promotion. The press release mentioned the substantial compensation package. You've been holding out on us, Alex." And there it was. They hadn't come because they missed me. They hadn't come to mend fences. They'd come because they'd caught the scent of money. "I've worked hard for what I have," I said simply. "And now you can help your family," my father replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Melissa's got student loans piling up and my Social Security barely covers rent. I looked at my sister, who was now examining my entertainment system. I thought you dropped out last semester. She waved her hand dismissively. Taking a break. But the loans don't care. My father's eyes narrowed, calculating. He gestured around my living room. You've got all this now. 3 bedrooms for one person? Seems wasteful when family is struggling. I felt a familiar pressure building in my chest, the tension that always came with their demands. But something was different this time. As I watched them casually invade my space, making plans for my money before even asking, a cold clarity settled over me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I observed them as they moved around my home, touching my things, making comments. My father checking out my liquor cabinet. Melissa taking pictures of my view. They weren't guests, they were prospectors, surveying land they intended to claim. I made a decision in that moment. This would be the last time they mistook my silence for weakness. My father misinterpreted my silence as consideration. Look, I've been thinking, he continued, settling deeper into my couch. This place is too big for just you. Melissa's apartment is a dump, and the landlord's threatening eviction. Hello, subscribe to Secret Diary for more content. Thanks for your support. 3rd time this year? Melissa added, without looking up from her phone, as if eviction notices were simply an annoying part of adulting. So here's what we're thinking. My father leaned forward conspiratorially. We move in here. You've got the space. We're family. It makes perfect sense. I blinked, processing the audacity. They hadn't spoken to me in nearly a year, and now they were planning to move into my home? That's not going to happen, I said evenly. My father's face darkened. We're not asking for charity, just family helping family. Would you be contributing to the mortgage, utilities, groceries? I asked, already knowing the answer. He waved his hand dismissively. We can figure all that out later. The important thing is getting Melissa out of that apartment before she's on the street. There are other options, I pointed out. She could get a job. You could get a job. Melissa snorted. I have a job. I'm an influencer. My Insta is taking off. She's very talented, my father nodded seriously. Got nearly 1,000 followers now. That's not a job, I said. That's a hobby that isn't paying your rent. My father stood, his temper, always simmering just beneath the surface, beginning to flare. You always think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got lucky with some tech job. Lucky? I raised an eyebrow. I worked 70-hour weeks for years. I took night classes while working full-time. I ate ramen for dinner so I could afford certification courses. That's not luck. Oh, here we go with the self-made man speech. Melissa rolled her eyes. Newsflash. You're not special. Lots of people work hard. The difference is they don't abandon their family when they make it. I felt a surge of anger but tamped it down. This was their game. Provoke until I reacted, then play the victim when I pushed back. Not today. I didn't abandon anyone, I said calmly. I've helped when I could, but moving you into my home isn't happening. My father changed tactics, his voice softening. Son, we're in real trouble here. I hate to ask, but if not the house, could you maybe help with a loan? Just until we get back on our feet? How much? I asked, knowing full well this was the real reason for their visit. 20,000 would help clear things up, he said, as casually as if asking to borrow a lawnmower. $20,000. Not a small amount. Not an emergency fund for medical bills or urgent repairs. This was clearly designed to be the opening bid in a negotiation they assumed would end with me writing a check to make them go away. What's the money for exactly? I asked. Like I said, Melissa's eviction, some back rent I owe, a few credit cards. He trailed off vaguely. I nodded slowly, appearing to consider it. I'll need some time to think about this. Hope flashed in my father's eyes. He thought he had me. Of course, of course. Take all the time you need. He glanced at his watch. We're staying at the Marriott downtown. Not cheap, but Melissa deserves better than those budget places. I nearly laughed at the irony, complaining about money while staying at a premium hotel, but kept my expression neutral. I'll let you know my decision tomorrow. As I showed them out, Melissa lingered in the doorway. This place really is nice, she said, looking around one last time. The guest room would be perfect for me. She said it as if it were already decided. as if my home were simply an asset waiting to be redistributed to her. After they left, I didn't dwell on anger or hurt. Instead, I went to my home office, opened my laptop, and began to work. Not on software code, but on something far more important, a strategy. First, I called my bank and froze any new credit inquiries. My father had my social security number, and I wouldn't put identity theft past him if desperation hit. Next, I contacted my financial advisor and my attorney. Then I started making a series of calls to people from my hometown, old connections who might know what my father and sister had really been up to. By evening, I had a clearer picture. My father's financial troubles weren't new. He'd borrowed money from everyone who would lend it, spinning different tales for different marks: medical bills, car repairs, temporary cash flow issues. None of it was true. Most tellingly, I discovered he'd recently been bragging at his local bar about his successful son, who was finally going to set the family up right. He'd even hinted at moving to a much better place soon. My home was already being mentally repossessed before they'd even seen it. As for Melissa, her influencer career consisted mainly of posting photos in clothes and with products she couldn't afford, creating the illusion of a glamorous lifestyle. She'd been telling people she was about to come into serious money and move to a luxury property. They weren't just asking for help. They were planning a takeover. I sat back in my chair, contemplating what I'd learned. Some might have felt betrayed or hurt. I just felt clarity. The fog of obligation and guilt that had clouded my judgment for years was finally lifting. I saw them clearly now, not as family who needed help, but as predators circling what they perceived as easy prey. I closed my laptop and went to bed early. Tomorrow would require focus. Tomorrow I would need to be sharp, because tomorrow Richard and Melissa Reynolds would learn exactly what kind of man their meal ticket had become. Morning arrived with a text from my father. Thinking about our talk. When can we meet today? Eager to get things settled. No pleasantries, no hope you slept well, or looking forward to seeing you. Just a prompt for the financial transaction he believed was imminent. I replied that I'd meet them at my house at noon, then spent the morning finalizing my preparations. At precisely 12 hours, the doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I could see them standing on my porch. My father was wearing his business meeting outfit, a sport coat that had seen better days paired with khaki pants. Melissa had clearly dressed for moving day, wearing casual clothes but with full makeup and hair styled, no doubt for the "welcome to my new home" social media post she planned to make later. I opened the door and gestured them in silently. "Beautiful day," my father said with forced cheerfulness as he entered. "Really makes you appreciate having a nice place like this." I led them to the dining room where I'd set up 3 chairs around the table. On the table was a single folder, red, crisp, and unopened. "Please sit," I said, taking my own seat at the head of the table. They exchanged a quick glance, perhaps sensing something in my tone, but sat down as directed. My father immediately eyed the folder. "So, have you had time to think about our situation?" he asked, attempting to sound humble, but unable to fully mask the eagerness in his voice. "I have." I nodded. "I've thought about it a great deal." Melissa leaned forward. And I've made my decision," I said calmly. "I will not be giving you $20,000. My father's face fell, but he quickly composed himself. "Now, Alex, I know it sounds like a lot, but..." I held up my hand, cutting him off. "I'm not finished. I will not be giving you $20,000. I will not be giving you any money at all, and you will absolutely not be moving into my home." The silence that followed was absolute. Melissa's mouth hung slightly open in shock. My father's expression darkened, the familiar storm gathering. "What the hell is this?" he finally sputtered. "We came all this way, and you're just saying no? After everything we've done for you?" There it was, the instant pivot to unearned victimhood, his specialty. "What exactly have you done for me, Dad?" I asked, my voice level. "Specifically, what support have you provided in my adult life that would entitle you to a claim on my home or my income?" He flushed red. "I raised you. I put food on the table. Sometimes," I acknowledged, "when you weren't spending the grocery money at the track or the bar. But let's say you did the minimum required by law as a parent. That obligation ended when I turned 18. Since then, the financial support has flowed entirely in one direction, from me to you." "This isn't about money," Melissa interjected, trying a different angle. "This is about family, about being there for each other." I turned to her, Where were you when I graduated college? When I landed my first job? When I bought this house? She had no answer. You know what I realized last night? I continued. You two don't actually care about me at all. You care about what I can provide. I'm not your son or your brother. I'm an ATM that you've come to make a withdrawal from. That's not true, my father protested, but weakly. I opened the red folder and removed several printed pages. Let's talk about why you're really here. I slid a page toward my father. It was a printout of a social media post. His friend congratulating him on his upcoming upgrade to a new living situation, dated 2 weeks earlier. You were planning to move into my house before you even asked me, I said. Next came a screenshot of a text conversation I'd obtained from an old family friend, my father discussing how his rich son was finally going to pay up after all I've done for him. You weren't asking for a loan, I continued. You were planning to establish residency here and never leave. Finally, I placed before Melissa a printout of her own social media DMs that a tech-savvy former classmate had helped me access, messages where she described her plan to crash at my brother's fancy house until I can figure out my next move. Might be years, LOL. You never had any intention of this being temporary, I said. They stared at the evidence, momentarily speechless. Then my father's face contorted with rage. You spied on us? What kind of son does that? The kind who's tired of being manipulated and lied to, I replied. The kind who decided to do some due diligence before handing over his home to people who see him as nothing more than a resource to exploit. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, on cue, practiced, theatrical. How could you be so cruel? We're your family. Family doesn't treat family like an extraction opportunity, I said. Family supports each other, yes, but they don't scheme and plot to take advantage. My father stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't have to listen to this, you ungrateful little... Yes, you do have to listen. I cut him off, my voice still calm but with an edge of steel. Because I'm not finished. Something in my tone made him pause. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar sound of me standing my ground without emotion clouding my judgment. Perhaps it was the realization that his tactics, the anger, the guilt, the intimidation, weren't working anymore. You came here with a plan, I continued. You thought you'd pressure me into opening my home and my bank account to you. You thought you'd use family as a weapon to override my boundaries. That ends today. I closed the folder deliberately, the soft sound somehow final in the tense silence. I want you both to leave now, I said. Don't come back. Don't call. Don't text. If you need financial assistance, there are government programs and social services available. I can email you those resources if you'd like. My father's face was a mask of disbelief. This wasn't how these confrontations had ever gone before. In the past, I'd either capitulated to keep the peace or fought back emotionally, giving him the conflict he thrived on. But now I was neither yielding nor fighting. I was simply stating facts and establishing consequences. You can't be serious, he finally said. We're your family. Your only family. That was your choice, I replied. Not mine. Melissa stood now too, her tears suddenly dry, anger replacing the performative sadness. You think you're so much better than us. You got lucky with your stupid tech job, and now you're too good for the people who raised you? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a strange mix of pity and resolve. I'm not better than you, Melissa. I just made different choices. And I'm continuing to make different choices now. I stood, signaling that the conversation was over. Please leave. They didn't move immediately, perhaps waiting for me to crack, to show weakness, to give them an opening. I gave them nothing but silence and a steady gaze. Finally, my father grabbed his jacket. This isn't over. You'll regret this. It wasn't a threat that worried me. It was the desperate flailing of a man who'd run out of leverage. I walked them to the door, maintaining my composure. As they stepped onto the porch, Melissa turned back. You know, Dad was right about you all along, she spat. You never cared about anyone but yourself. I simply closed the door, locked it, and walked back to my dining room to collect the folder of evidence. Through the window, I watched them get into their rental car and drive away, my father gesturing angrily as Melissa stared at her phone. The house felt different somehow. Cleaner, as if a persistent mold had finally been removed from the foundation. I knew they would be back. This was just the beginning, but for the first time in my adult life, I was prepared to handle whatever came next on my terms, not theirs. I gave them exactly 24 hours before they made their next move. The following day, My doorbell rang just after I finished a work video call. Through the security camera, I saw my father alone this time. His posture slumped, his expression contrite. The angry bluster was gone, replaced by what appeared to be humble resignation. I'd anticipated this, the pivot to remorse when intimidation failed. I opened the door but remained in the doorway, blocking entry. "Alex," he began, his voice soft and wounded. "I've been thinking about yesterday. I was upset, said things I didn't mean. You have to understand. I'm desperate." "I understand completely," I replied calmly. This seemed to encourage him. Good. I knew you would. You've always been the smart one, the reasonable one." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, forget about us moving in. That was too much to ask. But the loan. We really do need help, son." I nodded thoughtfully. "Come in. Let's talk about it." A flash of triumph crossed his face before he could mask it with gratitude. He thought he'd found the crack in my resolve. He followed me into the living room, taking the same seat on the couch as before, immediately making himself comfortable. "I've been up all night thinking about this," he continued his performance. "You're right that 20,000 is a lot. Maybe we could start with something smaller? 5,000 would at least keep Melissa from being evicted." "Before we discuss amounts," I said, "I'd like to understand the full picture of your financial situation. It would help me determine what kind of assistance would actually be beneficial long-term." He hesitated. "It's complicated. Bills piling up, you know how it is." "I'd need to see documentation," I continued. "Bank statements, credit card bills, lease agreements, loan documents. I'd want to know exactly where the money is going before I commit to anything." His expression flickered between confusion and wariness. This wasn't the conversation he'd expected. "I don't have all that with me," he said. "Besides, that's private." "So is my financial information," I countered. "Yet you felt entitled to make demands based on what you thought I could afford." He shifted uncomfortably. "That's different. We're family." "Exactly," I nodded. "We're family. Which is why I want to help in a way that actually addresses the root problems, not just puts a Band-Aid on symptoms." I reached for a notebook on my coffee table. "Let's start with your monthly income. What's your Social Security payment?" "Alex, come on. I didn't come here for financial counseling." "No, you came for money," I said plainly. "I'm offering something more valuable, a structured approach to solving your financial issues. If you're truly in dire straits and not just looking for easy cash, this should be welcome." His face hardened. "I don't need a lecture from my own kid on how to manage my money. Evidence suggests otherwise," I replied, still keeping my tone neutral. "Look, Dad, here's the deal. I'm not giving you cash without conditions. That's off the table. What I am willing to do is work with you on a financial recovery plan. I'll help you create a budget, identify resources for debt management, possibly even connect you with job opportunities through my network." "Jobs?" he scoffed. "At my age? You're 62, not 90. Plenty of people your age work. The difference is, they've often built careers and savings by this point." The facade of contrition was crumbling rapidly. "This is insulting. I came here for help, not judgment." "I'm offering help," I said. "Just not the kind you want." He stood abruptly. "Keep your charity. We'll figure it out ourselves." "Will you?" I asked. "Because from what I've gathered, your plan was to move in here and never leave, using family obligation as leverage whenever I objected." The mask dropped completely. "You think you're so smart, you have no idea what's coming." "Actually, I do," I said, standing as well. "You're going to try to punish me for not complying. You'll try to turn family members against me. You might even attempt something more desperate. I'm prepared for all of it." His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, I walked to my front door and opened it. "I think we're done here. Next time, bring financial documentation if you want to discuss assistance. Otherwise, don't come back." He stormed past me, then turned on the porch. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "Actually, it is," I replied, and closed the door. I watched through the window as he pulled out his phone, presumably calling Melissa. His gestures were animated, angry. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know they were moving to their backup plan. I had been monitoring my credit alert since their first visit. Within hours of my father leaving, I received a notification. Someone had attempted to open a credit card in my name. The application had been automatically declined due to the credit freeze I'd put in place. The address on the application? My father's apartment. Next came a series of texts from Melissa, alternating between guilt trips, "Can't believe you'd let your own sister be homeless," and vague threats. "You have no idea what Dad is capable of when he gets desperate." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I documented everything. The attempted identity theft, the threatening messages, the escalating harassment. I forwarded it all to my attorney. 3 days after my father's second visit, I received a call from my aunt, my father's sister, whom I rarely spoke with. "Alex, honey, I'm worried about your dad and Melissa," she began without preamble. "They're saying you've completely abandoned them, that they're about to be on the street, and you're refusing to help despite having plenty of money." "Did they mention trying to steal my identity to open fraudulent credit accounts?" I asked calmly. Her shocked silence was answer enough. "Aunt Karen, I love you, but I need you to understand something. Dad and Melissa aren't destitute because of bad luck. They're facing the consequences of years of poor decisions and entitlement. I've offered to help them create a financial plan and connect them with resources, but they're only interested in cash with no accountability." "Oh," she said quietly. "They didn't mention that part. I'm sure they didn't," I replied. "They're trying to recruit you as an ally in their pressure campaign. They've done the same with 3 other relatives so far. How do you know that?" "Because I've received nearly identical calls from all of them. It's a pattern, Aunt Karen, and I'm done enabling it." After we hung up, I received a text from my aunt. "I had no idea. I'm sorry they dragged me into this." By the end of the week, the campaign had expanded. My father had posted a vague social media plea about family betrayal and abandonment in our time of need. Melissa had created a GoFundMe titled "Homeless After Family Betrayal," complete with staged photos of their supposedly dire living conditions. I didn't publicly respond to any of it. I simply continued documenting, sharing the truth privately with those who contacted me directly, and preparing for what I knew would be their most desperate move. It came exactly 2 weeks after their initial visit. I returned home from a coffee meeting to find my front door ajar. The security system had been disabled, not by force, but with the code. A code only 3 people knew: myself, my cleaning service, and, because I'd once allowed him to check on my place during a business trip, my father. Inside, the house was in disarray. Drawers pulled open, closets emptied, my home office ransacked. At first glance, it appeared to be a burglary, but nothing of significant value was missing. Not my laptop, not my television, not even the cash I kept in my desk drawer. Instead, they had taken only personal items: family photos, my high school diploma, childhood mementos, things with sentimental rather than monetary value. Things they thought I couldn't replace. Things they believed they could hold hostage. I walked through the chaos of my violated home, stepping over scattered papers and upended cushions, and felt not rage, but a cold, crystallizing certainty. This wasn't a burglary. This was a message. If we can't have what's yours, neither can you. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to the police to report the break-in. The second was to my attorney. "It's time," I said simply. "Execute the plan." The next morning, while my father and Melissa were likely congratulating themselves on their victory, my attorney filed an official police report documenting the identity theft attempt, complete with the evidence I'd gathered. Simultaneously, he submitted a formal restraining order request based on the break-in, harassment, and escalating pattern of threatening behavior. I didn't announce these actions. I didn't call or text them warnings. I simply allowed the legal system to work as designed, methodically, impersonally, and with the full force of documented evidence behind it. 3 days later, my father received his first surprise: a visit from police officers serving him with both the restraining order and notice of the identity theft investigation. According to my aunt, who called me immediately afterward, he was beside himself with rage and disbelief. "They treated me like a criminal," he reportedly shouted after the officers left. "My own son did this to me." The restraining order was comprehensive. No contact of any kind, no coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, no contact through third parties. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. For most people, this would have been sufficient deterrent, but I knew my father's particular brand of entitlement too well. The restraining order wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Melissa was the first to test the boundaries. She created new social media accounts to bypass my blocks, sending messages that danced carefully around direct threats while still attempting to manipulate. Hope you're happy now that you've destroyed what's left of our family. Dad's health is failing from the stress. This is on you. I documented each message without responding and forwarded them to my attorney and the police as violations of the restraining order. Each one strengthened my case. Next came the financial attacks. My father, using my childhood information that only a parent would know, attempted to access my investment accounts. He tried to redirect my mail. He even contacted my employer with vague allegations about concerns regarding my character, hoping to damage my professional standing. Each attempt failed due to the security measures I'd put in place. Each failure further documented his escalating desperation. The most brazen move came a week after the restraining order was issued. I arrived home to find them parked across the street from my house, clearly violating the 500-foot restriction. My father sat in the driver's seat, staring at my home with unmistakable hostility. Melissa was in the passenger seat, filming with her phone, no doubt planning to create content about confronting my selfish brother. I didn't approach them. I didn't acknowledge their presence at all. I simply parked in my driveway, entered my home, and called the police to report the violation. 20 minutes later, I watched through my security cameras as officers approached their car. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see my father's animated gestures, his posture rigid with indignation. Melissa kept filming, apparently believing this would somehow help their case. Both were arrested on the spot for violating the restraining order. They spent the night in jail before being released on bail, with strict warnings that further violations would result in more serious consequences. But the real impact came 2 days later when my father appeared before a judge. I attended the hearing with my attorney but said nothing. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The documented pattern of harassment, the attempted identity theft, the break-in, and now the blatant violation of a court order. My father attempted his usual tactics, playing the victim, invoking family obligation, claiming misunderstandings. The judge was unmoved. The restraining order was extended for 3 years, with enhanced penalties for any further violations. Additionally, the identity theft investigation was proceeding as a separate criminal matter. As we left the courthouse, my father called out to me, ignoring both his lawyer's attempts to quiet him and the terms of the restraining order he'd just been reprimanded for violating. "You think you've won?" he shouted across the corridor. "You've got nothing without family. Nothing!" I didn't turn back. I didn't engage. I simply kept walking, my attorney at my side, while a bailiff intervened to prevent my father from following. That evening, I received an unexpected call from my aunt. "I've been talking with your father's neighbors," she said without preamble. "Alex, it's worse than we thought. They're being evicted. Not because of financial troubles, but because of complaints. Loud arguments at all hours, property damage, threatening behavior toward other residents." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "The thing is," she continued hesitantly, "they've been telling everyone they're moving into your place. They've already given notice on their apartment. They have nowhere to go when the eviction happens next week." I considered this information carefully. It wasn't my problem to solve, yet I knew they would try to make it so. Their desperation would only escalate. "Thank you for letting me know," I told my aunt. "I appreciate the warning." After we hung up, I made one final call to the property management company that handled my father's apartment building. I identified myself as a concerned family member and inquired about the eviction situation. "I understand there have been issues," I said carefully. "I'm wondering if there's any way to resolve this without an eviction on their record, which would only make their housing situation more difficult in the future." The property manager was understandably cautious, but eventually explained that while the eviction process had begun, it could potentially be halted if certain conditions were met. Payment of all back rent, compensation for damages, and most importantly, their voluntary departure from the property within the week. "How much would that total?" I asked. The figure she quoted, just under $5,000, was substantial but not crippling to me. It was far less than the $20,000 my father had initially demanded. I made my decision. I'd like to pay that amount directly to the management company, not to my father. In exchange, I want documentation that the eviction has been canceled and that they left voluntarily with no further claims against them. "We can arrange that," she confirmed. "One more thing. I added. They cannot know this payment came from me. As far as they're concerned, you've decided to give them one last chance to avoid eviction if they pay what they owe and leave peacefully. I understand, the property manager said. We can handle it that way. I transferred the funds that evening. It wasn't an act of reconciliation or forgiveness. It was a strategic decision to prevent their homelessness from becoming leverage in their ongoing campaign against me. It was also, in a way, a final severance payment, the last financial tie I would ever have with them. 3 days later, my aunt called again. It's the strangest thing, she said. The property management company told your dad they're giving him a chance to avoid eviction if he pays up and moves out voluntarily. He's telling everyone it's because they recognize the injustice of the situation, but I thought you should know. Thanks for keeping me informed, I said simply. He has no idea it was you, does he? She asked softly. And he never will, I replied. This isn't about getting credit or gratitude. It's about ending this cycle permanently. What happened next was precisely what I had anticipated. With the eviction threat neutralized but still facing the reality of needing new housing immediately, my father and Melissa pivoted to their backup plan, finding other family members to take them in. My aunt, now fully aware of their patterns, declined. So did 2 cousins and an elderly uncle. Each refusal further diminished their options until only one remained, a distant relative in Arizona who hadn't yet experienced their particular brand of financial parasitism. A week later, they loaded their belongings into a rented moving truck and left town. My aunt sent me a photo of the truck pulling away, not to hurt me, but to let me know it was finally over. The identity theft case proceeded without their presence. My father, represented by a public defender, ultimately accepted a plea deal that included probation, mandatory financial counseling, and restitution. Melissa, who hadn't been directly implicated in that particular crime, faced no legal consequences beyond the restraining order violation. I didn't follow them to Arizona. I didn't hire investigators to track their movements. I simply lived my life, secure in the knowledge that the geographic distance and legal boundaries now between us would make any further attempts at manipulation exceedingly difficult. The first month after their departure was oddly unsettling. I'd grown so accustomed to being on high alert, to documenting every contact and anticipating each new angle of attack, that the sudden quiet felt almost like a void. But gradually, that space filled with something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. I changed my security codes. I upgraded my home security system. I established a new trust with clear provisions, preventing any family member from making claims against my assets. I took every reasonable precaution, then focused on moving forward rather than looking back. 6 months passed without incident. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line made my stomach tighten. Your father. It was from the relative in Arizona who had taken them in. The message was brief but revealing. I thought you should know that your father and sister stayed with me for exactly 3 weeks before I had to ask them to leave. The constant demands, the sense of entitlement, the refusal to contribute, it was unbearable. I now understand why you took the actions you did. They've moved on to another relative in New Mexico. I've warned her, but she insists on learning the hard way. You were right to protect yourself. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The cycle would continue, but I was no longer part of it. It's been 2 years since my father and Melissa left for Arizona, beginning their nomadic journey from one relative to the next. In that time, I've received occasional updates from family members who've encountered them. Each story remarkably similar, each ending with the same conclusion. They haven't changed. Their pattern remains consistent. They arrive with promises of short stays and minimal burden. They speak of imminent financial windfalls that never materialize. They gradually increase their demands while decreasing their contributions. And when the inevitable breaking point comes, when their host finally sets boundaries, they depart in a flurry of accusations and victimhood, seeking their next target. The restraining order remains in effect, renewed at my attorney's recommendation. There have been no further direct violations, though I've heard from mutual connections that my name still features prominently in their narrative. I'm still the villain in their story, the heartless son who abandoned his family in their time of need. I've made peace with that characterization. The people whose opinions matter to me know the truth, and those who choose to believe their version without question aren't people I need in my life. As for my own journey, the clarity that came from standing firm against their manipulation has transformed more than just my relationship with them. It's changed how I approach all relationships, professional and personal. I've become more discerning about who I allow into my inner circle, more willing to establish boundaries, and more comfortable enforcing them when necessary. 6 months ago, I received a promotion to Senior Director of Engineering at Cypress Technologies, a position that came with both increased responsibility and significantly higher compensation. I celebrated quietly with a small group of genuine friends who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I've also become more intentional about helping others, not out of obligation or guilt, but from a place of genuine choice. I've established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from my old neighborhood. I volunteer monthly with a financial literacy program for young adults aging out of foster care. These connections feel real and meaningful in ways my family relationships never did. Last month, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through my attorney. It was from Melissa. Unlike my father's predictable scripts of blame and entitlement, her message contained something I hadn't seen before, the faintest glimmer of self-awareness. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she wrote. "For a long time, I was angry at you for cutting us off. But after going through 5 different relatives' homes in 2 years, I'm starting to see patterns I never noticed before. Dad always finds someone to blame for our problems, and it's never him. I always followed his lead, but I'm not sure I can keep doing that. I'm not saying you were right about everything, but maybe you weren't completely wrong either." She closed by asking if we could talk sometime, careful to note that she wasn't asking for money or a place to stay, just conversation. I considered her request carefully. The old Alex might have jumped at this potential opening, eager to rebuild the bridge regardless of how shaky its foundations remained. The new Alex recognized that while her words showed promise, actions would be the true test of any meaningful change. I responded through my attorney, keeping appropriate distance while acknowledging her outreach. "I appreciate your reflections and the courage it took to share them. True change takes time to demonstrate. For now, I think it's best we maintain our current boundaries. If you're serious about charting a different path, I encourage you to pursue education, stable employment, and financial independence. Those steps would speak louder than any words. I wish you well in that journey." I haven't heard back, and I don't know if I will. Perhaps her message was genuine. Perhaps it was just a new tactic in the same old game. Time will tell, and I'm content to let it unfold without rushing to judgment either way. As for my father, there have been no similar moments of reflection. According to family members who still maintain contact with him, he remains convinced that he's the victim of ungrateful children and an unfair world. At 64, he continues to drift between temporary living situations, still waiting for the lucky break that will solve all his problems without requiring him to change. 3 weeks ago, I closed on a vacation property, a small cabin by a lake 2 hours from the city. It's nothing extravagant, but it's mine. Another tangible result of my work and disciplined financial choices. As I sat on the dock that first evening, watching the sunset reflect across the water, I felt something profound: contentment. Not happiness in the exuberant, temporary sense, but a deeper satisfaction. The knowledge that I'd built a life aligned with my values, protected it when necessary, and continued to grow despite the emotional turbulence of the past. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd given in to their demands that day. If I'd written the check, or worse, allowed them to move into my home, the financial cost would have been substantial, but the true price would have been much higher. My autonomy, my boundaries, my self-respect. By saying no, calmly, firmly, without drama or apology, I reclaimed more than just my home. I reclaimed my right to define what family means to me. Family isn't about biology or obligation. It isn't about enduring mistreatment because blood is thicker than water. Family is about mutual respect, genuine care, and the choice to support each other's growth rather than enable destructive patterns. I've built that kind of family now, not through birth, but through carefully cultivated relationships with people who demonstrate through consistent actions that they value connection over extraction, growth over stagnation, truth over comfortable lies. My father showed up at my door expecting access to everything I'd built. He left with nothing because that's exactly what he'd earned. Not through my cruelty or indifference, but through his own choices, repeated countless times over decades. In the end, this isn't a story about revenge. It's not about punishing my father and sister for their actions. It's about consequences, natural, logical outcomes of choices made with full awareness of potential results. It's about the clarity that comes from removing yourself from toxic dynamics and the peace that follows when you stop participating in other people's dysfunction. My father found out how much I earn, showed up with my spoiled sister, and demanded my house. I didn't say a word, but when he came back the next day, he discovered what no really means. Not just a word, but a complete sentence, a boundary, and sometimes the beginning of a better life for everyone involved. Hello. Subscribe to Secret Diary for more content. Thanks for your support.